I think it's fair to say there's a lot of smoke right now at Red Bull. Max Verstappen does not seem thrilled with how things are going to start the season. Helmut Marko then was asked about it, and he said the following in regards to concern about Max possibly leaving in the future. Marko said, "The concern is great.
Max isn't happy, Helmut's worried, and Red Bull's in the hot seat. Check this video out now.
As I said, improvements have to come in the near future so that he has a car with which he can win again." I'm curious, we know that Marko obviously is very outward, outspoken. He says a lot of things to the media. Laz, what's the motive to go on record and say something like this, that there is great concern when it comes to Max Verstappen?
Well, there is another thing about Helmut, and that's that he likes to say it like it is. So it's news to no one at Red Bull or anyone watching Formula One that Red Bull are not where they should be. And in the last year, there has been a pretty steep decline from winning almost every race in 2023 to starting the 24 season winning almost every race, and then to now where they're struggling to be right at the front. Of course, there was that Japan victory for Verstappen, a couple of weeks ago, but within the space of a week, they looked absolutely nowhere in Bahrain. And so Helmut said this after that race. Max struggled to sixth place.
Max's win in Japan wasn't just a flash of brilliance. It was proof that when the car is dialed in, no one touches him. Red Bull's inconsistency this season highlights how tight the field has become. Still, if Verstappen is finishing sixth in an off weekend, that tells you just how high his baseline remains.
But I think there are other issues at play here that have not gone away over the past 12 months. And we know that in those 12 months, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, there's been a bit of a power dynamic between the two, trying to ensure in both cases that they stay in their roles for very different reasons. But I think Marko has always been very closely aligned with Max Verstappen. And so everything that he says, you have to kind of take very seriously when he's talking about Max and concerns of losing him. But is it also perhaps a little dig at Horner, just as Red Bull are really starting to struggle with the performance of the car, to say, hey, look, that side's on you, get it sorted, because I'm trying to keep Max at the team. You've got to get the car sorted. And is it more power politics at play? And I think that will become apparent over the next few races. But the key thing, which Max has made very clear, Max hasn't really talked about leaving the team or anything like that just yet.
This isn't about Max dropping hints. It's about Max setting standards. He's been clear. He wants to win, and he wants the team focused on performance, not infighting. Marko publicly defending him signals just how vital Verstappen is to Red Bull's long-term success. You can't blame him for staying quiet. He's letting his driving speak while others posture for influence. But eventually, even Max might need to speak louder if things don't stabilize soon.
He will definitely be asked this weekend, but he hasn't really talked about that as yet. But the one thing he has consistently said is that the car is not where he wants it. He's not happy with it, and the team really needs to start to work together, because his only goal, it seems, when he turns up at a racetrack, is to work towards the defense of his title. And at the moment, he does not have a car capable of doing that.
I would say that winning heals, cures all, right? And so when they're winning and you're at your best, everything looks like it's going well. Everybody's friendly. They love each other. They love working together. Nate, how would you describe Helmut Marko, Christian Horner's relationship during the winning days as compared to what you've seen now?
Massively different. And the winning days is a really good point, but also a key moment within that winning days, right in the middle of it, was when Dietrich Mateschitz died in October 22. And that was kind of, it wasn't really the peak for Red Bull, because 23 was also very dominant as well. But that was the moment that really created the power politics that Lawrence just mentioned. Helmut Marko kind of drifted over to the Austria side. Then the Thai side have always been very close to Christian Horner. That's kind of the way Red Bull's set up. I think it's 51% is owned by the Thais, 49% is owned by Mateschitz and his family. And that really is underplaying every single thing that's happening at Red Bull at the moment. There's talk of the fact that, Marko's no longer really involved in driver decisions, but he is closely involved with the Max Verstappen stuff. So again, like Lawrence was saying, anything Marko says has to be taken very, very seriously. But I mean, I've been in the Red Bull hospitality, and it can be weird. And and I think Lawrence will attest to this as well. There's just a weird vibe down there, especially when Jos Verstappen's in town as well, because you have all of these big figures down at Red Bull, and you can tell they're just kind of like, they're side-eyeing each other. That there's an air. Someone, Marco will walk in or Horner will walk in, and you can see people tense up a little bit. There is a bizarre atmosphere down there, and you're absolutely right, Katie, because when they were winning, I think it kind of plastered over a lot of those cracks. But especially from about Miami onwards last year, obviously that's when we had the lead into that week was that Nui was leaving. Lando wins, McLaren come with that big upgrade. The dynamic, and I think a lot of the things that had been papered over suddenly came to the surface, and they haven't really gone away since then. They've come more and more from the surface. So, I mean, Horner and Marco, I think have always kind of just coexisted.
Red Bull's internal politics have gone from whispers to full-blown storylines, and it's starting to reflect in the on-track results. Max Verstappen may not be vocal about it publicly, but the frustration is clear. He doesn't have the car he needs, and now he's surrounded by a fractured leadership. It's not just about who's making decisions. It's about whether this team still has the cohesion to build and sustain a winning machine. What was once the most united garage on the grid now feels like a pressure cooker, and Max deserves far better than that.
I think when Mateschitz was there, the thing he was very good at doing was getting the best out of those two, even if they didn't quite get along. Now, I think that that has really kind of split open quite a lot more. And 12 months ago in Saudi Arabia, when I was there covering that race, we thought Max might be on the verge of leaving Red Bull as well, because there was talk of Marco leaving. And so the one thing that makes Marco incredibly powerful is that the only real thing he's done at Red Bull is, and this is multiple people at Red Bull have told me this, the only real thing he's done at Red Bull of any meaningful note for the past couple of years is specifically deal with Max and his contract, Max and, clauses and stuff like that. So that's really all he's there for. And so that's why if you take Marco out of the equation, Max is like, well, that's my safety blanket. I'm gone. So Marco, even though he seems very powerless on the outside, he still has this one big chip, and it probably is the most powerful bargaining chip in Formula One right now, right? Which is Max Verstappen, the best driver, I think, quite comfortably at the moment in Formula One, is kind of hanging by a thread at this team, and Marco seems to be the guy holding him there. And to that point, Lawrence made very well, it was a dig at Christian, because I think as soon as Verstappen leaves, I don't see how even the tie side of that power equation can look at anything other than saying, well, Horner's the guy that's let this guy walk through the door and leave.
The power dynamics inside Red Bull have never been more fragile. Helmut Marko's quiet grip on Max Verstappen isn't just symbolic, it's structural. In a team fractured by politics, Marko represents the last point of trust for Verstappen, and possibly the last thread keeping him from walking away. If Red Bull loses that, it's not just losing a driver, it's losing the very anchor of their dominance. And no PR spin or political maneuvering from Horner's side can mask that reality.
We have to change something up. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what's going on there. But yeah, it's. I think the bigger tension is Horner and Jos, but you can tell that Horner and Marco just, there's kind of this uneasy coexistence going on between them, which has been the case for a little while.
Well, let's follow that line of thinking, okay? So if Max Verstappen were to leave Red Bull, what happens to the team? What happens to this dynasty that they've created behind one of the best drivers ever to involve himself in this sport, Laz?
I think the first thing you'd see, rather inevitably and obviously, is a slump in performance, because the one guy who's able to put that car at the sharp end of the grid is Max Verstappen. His teammates, be it Perez last year, Lawson at the start of the year, Tsunoda's been a little bit better, but probably still, not exactly where they need him to be. Clearly, that car is incredibly difficult to struggle with. Now, there's not really a suggestion that Max is going to walk out midway through the season, because, of course, there's nowhere to go. This is about 26, where he goes then. The other factor in all of this is where Red Bull are with their power unit for 26. Remember, they're building their own one as of next year. And so if that doesn't go to plan and the performance drops, then Max is probably, or if he knows the performance is going to drop already, if he's seen what problems they're facing with the power unit, then if Max leaves, then I think everything, really does struggle. The question there is whether, the ownership say, right, Christian, you're responsible, out you go, and they go from absolutely zero and build everything back up, or it's whether they keep the faith in Christian and allow him to build it back up. But either way, I think you're looking probably at several years in the weeds a bit in Formula One before they can build something back up, because there's no obvious replacement for Max. I mean, if he went to Mercedes, that doesn't seem very likely right now, but if he did, then of course George Russell would be on the market, be an obvious replacement to go the other way. But it seems more likely that George is going to stay at Mercedes and Max maybe we'll look at Aston Martin.
The reason Red Bull's dominance has lasted so long isn't just the car, it's Max Verstappen. No one else has consistently taken their machinery beyond its limits the way he has. If they lose him while heading into an untested engine project, the team's identity shifts overnight. Even Perez has shown the steep fall-off without Max's level of control and feedback. If Verstappen goes, Red Bull faces a dark period of uncertainty. And that's not speculation, it's history repeating itself.
Now, if he goes to Aston Martin, he's probably going to end up replacing Fernando in some way. And it's whether Fernando would want to carry on, whether Red Bull would really think, bringing Fernando in, someone who they've got a bit of a checkered history with already, would make sense. So I think the only answer is, if Verstappen does leave, is that you've got to start from zero and build the team up and get the core principles in the right place. At the moment, we talk about this underperforming car. There are reasons. And the main fundamental reason is that it has this awful balance between corners. Red Bull have come up with solutions for that in the wind tunnel make sense, but as soon as they are put on the track, they no longer work. So there's a correlation issue between what they're seeing with their simulations and the wind tunnel and what they're seeing on track. They've got a new wind tunnel in the pipeline, but it doesn't come online until 2027. So I think everything, if Max did leave next year, would have to be based around rebuilding the team for 27, except that you're going to be a year away from the top of the competition.
You said start back at zero, get rid of Christian Horner, essentially clean house. Does that include Helmut Marko? If Max Verstappen leaves, do you get rid of them both?
Well, this is the other thing. As Nate said, Marko being so closely linked to Verstappen, I think if Christian were to stay, I think there'd be an argument for keeping him, because who are you going to replace him with? Then I think he would look to get rid of Marko. And without Max there, I think Marko would all of a sudden look very vulnerable in that position, because he's quite old as well. So, it would be a natural retirement. They could spin it in a nice way and all that kind of stuff. And he would almost certainly step aside. What would be interesting is if they did point the finger at Christian. I'm not saying they will, because I think Christian still has power within that team. As Nate said, still has power with the 51% Thai owners. But yeah, if they did keep Christian, then yeah, I think Marko's gone. If they get rid of Christian, then it'd be interesting whether Marko could hold a position. But even then, I think really the sensible thing would be to start from zero with someone new. But who that person would be is a difficult thing to answer as well.
This correlation issue between the wind tunnel and the real-world track data is not just a blip, it's a fundamental weakness in Red Bull's infrastructure. And without a new tunnel until 2027, that's years of guesswork unless they get a generational talent to hold the car together. Right now, that's Max. But if he walks, you're not just losing a driver, you're losing the one person masking a technical collapse.
Okay, so he's given us two examples of possible landing spots for Max Verstappen, being Aston Martin and Mercedes, Nate. I don't want to go down a deep, dark rabbit hole here, because this could take over our entire podcast. And we will likely have podcast episodes dedicated to where Max Verstappen can go. But just any other team outside of Aston or Mercedes that would come to mind that could possibly be a spot that he goes to?
Not for 26. I mean, those are the two obvious ones. The only other place you look at is you look at Lewis. He's on a 2-year contract at Ferrari. Does Ferrari look at it and say, okay, maybe we try and get Max for the end of that Lewis contract, but again, does Max stay around? So in the immediacy, I think it is Aston and Mercedes. Mercedes is only an option as well, because Toto Wolff and George Russell haven't agreed an extension yet. As soon as that's on the table or that's done, then Aston is the only place really left for him straight away. So yeah, and that I think maybe plays into Red Bull's hands a little bit, is that the options he has are quite limited. But I think when you've got a guy like Max Verstappen, you have to consider that other teams probably might,
make some room.
Their thought process maybe changes to accommodate somebody like Max Verstappen in a way that it wouldn't for other drivers. So I think that the likes of Ferrari and McLaren look locked down for long term, but you just never know with Formula One, and it's so rare that a driver like Max Verstappen is available on the market. And I think a lot of teams look at that and say, well, look, we either get him or he goes to a rival for the next 5 years and wins championships with them. So that's the part of it that is interesting, is if other teams kind of change course with their future plans to accommodate Max. I think it was Alonso, wasn't it, Laz, in 2005. He won with Renault and he signed a contract for 2007 with McLaren, but then he still had the small matter of being there in 2006.
The scarcity of immediate landing spots might buy Red Bull time, but it doesn't eliminate the risk. Teams will absolutely reshuffle the deck for a chance at Max, especially with new regs and engine eras on the horizon. And if Max is looking at 2026 and sees no path to titles at Red Bull, that alone could accelerate those offers behind the scenes.
A bit like what Lewis did with signing a deal down the line for Ferrari. So there is precedent for it. I'm not sure. I'm not saying Ferrari are in the mix or I've heard anything about that, but you could imagine a team like Ferrari saying, okay, well, if Max is available, let's try and get him. But yeah, the two obvious ones are Aston and Mercedes before that.
Okay. I'm not even gonna take the bait there. Okay,
like you said, we can discuss.
We're gonna go down it, and we're gonna derail this whole episode.
When you said it, I was like, I'm just gonna throw Ferrari in the mix and then see what we get. But yeah, we'll park it. Yeah.
All right. Not all doom and gloom though. Okay, Yuki scored some points in Bahrain. Right now, as it stands, in the constructors, Red Bull is third, 71 points. They're 80 points behind McLaren. In the drivers' championship, Max is currently third with 69 points. He's 5 behind Piastri and 8 behind Lando Norris. So obviously very much in the hunt there. Do you guys think that Red Bull has the opportunity and the ability to right the ship before summer break? I mean, we've still got a bit of time, Laz.
Red Bull's current performance has raised a lot of concerns. But with Max Verstappen's focus and determination, the team still has hope to turn things around. The issues with the car's balance need to be resolved quickly if they want to close the gap to McLaren and Ferrari before the summer break. Given Max's competitive nature, he won't be giving up on the championship anytime soon. It's a matter of whether the team can give him the car he needs to succeed.
So there were meetings a couple of races ago, or between the races at Milton Keynes, which Max attended to try and understand how they can get this car where it should be in terms of, the feeling behind the wheel, the behaviour in the corner, which at the moment Max is not happy about, and then also brakes was another issue, and then also that imbalance in the corners has led to excessive tyre degradation. If they can find a solution to that, and that's not unheard of in Formula One, teams do bring updates that kind of resolve those kind of things, then yes, maybe. But they just seem so lost because of that reason I mentioned earlier, the lack of correlation, that perhaps the real, point where that car is probably where Yuki was in Bahrain. I mean, it was behind an Alpine and a Haas at the finish. I think they probably expect that they're the fourth best team overall, so ahead of those two. But that's probably where that car is on circuits, especially where tyre degradation comes into play. I think faster circuits, like the one we're at this weekend, and also circuits where there's a smooth track surface, again, like the one we're at this weekend, they can kind of paper over the cracks a bit. And that's perhaps where Max needs to be better than ever. But I think the reality, once we get into the swing of Imola, a circuit where we've got Miami first, actually. Miami, where a few issues were surfacing last year. Imola, a track where, again, Max won, but it was only just, and already it was clear that there was issues with the car riding bumps. Monaco, it really struggled. Into those races, if they don't start to have solutions come into the car by that point, then you've got to start to wonder, because there comes a point in this season as well where you say, okay, we're onto a bit of a lost cause here, trying to develop a car that, everything we do isn't working. We need to maintain some attention on 2026 and make sure some of the resources are going there. So that will be the big juggling act for Red Bull. I don't think they'll give up, because if they give up, that will not go down with Max, and then we're back to that conversation we had at the start of the podcast about will Max leave or not. But they really need basically the next set of upgrades to change the behaviour of that car. Otherwise, I don't think even Max Verstappen at his very best can beat Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in that McLaren, the way that McLaren's performing right now.
Red Bull's issues with tyre degradation and the car's balance are starting to feel like a real setback for Max and the team. They've had discussions and are working on upgrades, but the reality is they could be losing ground to McLaren. If these solutions don't come through in the next few races, Red Bull might have to shift their focus toward 2026 and risk a more significant loss of momentum this season. The stakes couldn't be higher for Max.